Good evening, class. We will be doing Human Resources, Chapter 5, Human Resource Planning and Recruitment. This will be talking briefly about forecasting and anticipating needs of the employer. Okay, so the learning objectives. Discuss how to align a company's strategic direction with its human resource planning. Again, we've spoken about this in the past, how important it is to have this interconnectivity, this nexus, if you will, between strategy and strategic direction and human resource planning. Human resource has many, many tentacles, and they reach far and deep into the organization.
I don't know how to make the microphone work on this thing.
Your microphone is fine. I hear you perfectly, Zoya. Okay, learning objective 2. Determine the labor demand for workers in various job categories throughout, so this way you have the ability to scan the general environment. Discuss the advantages and disadvantages of various ways of eliminating labor surplus and avoiding a labor shortage. And we'll be talking about them in terms of how painful they are to people, whether they're very painful, mildly, mid-level painful, or not painful at all. Describe the various recruitment policies that organizations adopt to make job vacancies more attractive. List the various sources for which job applicants can be drawn, the relative advantages and disadvantages, and the methods for evaluating them. And explain the recruiter's role in the recruitment process, the limits the recruiter faces, and the opportunities available. Introduction. Societal trends and events affect employers through consumer markets and, of course, labor markets. Consumer markets, well, if you're an employer and you sell stuff to the consumer market, of course it's going to impact you. But secondly, very, very important, is the labor market, because what the labor market does supplies you, the employer, with the necessary labor that you need to be able to staff.
I don't know how to make the volume.
Zoya, you have to adjust the volume on your device. Okay, keys to affecting utilizing labor markets. Clear idea of current configuration of human resources. Know where the organization is going in the future and how the present configuration of human resources relates to the configuration that will be needed in that future. And of course, address the discrepancies of what you have now and what you anticipate later on. Figure 5.1 is an overview of the human resource planning process. You have on the two sides, forecast of labor demand, forecast of labor supply, impacts forecast of labor surplus or shortage. In other words, we'll either have a shortage or a surplus. This will impact goal setting and strategic planning. In other words, if we have a surplus, we have one way of dealing with it. If we have a decrease, if we have a deficiency or lack thereof, a shortage, if you will, then there's another strategy. And program implementation and evaluation. Let's look at what is forecasting. Forecasting is used to ascertain the supply of and demand for various types of human resources, meaning what kind of departments do we need to staff? What types of employees? Do we need clerical employees? Do we need technical employees? Do we need employees that have medical knowledge? How much medical knowledge? Do they have to be an MD? Could they be an RN? Could they be an LPN? Can there be a nursing assistant? Can there be an assistant PA? Their PA is something like a lower level PA, like an assistant to PA. So we can use statistical or judgmental methods. Determining the labor demand. Demand forecasts are developed around specific job categories or skill areas relevant to the organization's current and future state. May use statistical models. Leading indicator predicts future labor demand. That's why it's a leading indicator. And useful when there is a long, stable history that can be used to reliably detect relationships amongst various variables. Determining the labor supply. Internal labor supply, and analyzes how many people are currently in various job categories within the company. That's your first step. because you can't worry about the outside market until you understand what's going on internally, what positions are currently filled, and what positions are being created, what positions have been vacated and need to be filled as a result of attrition. Transitional matrices show the proportion or number of employees in different job categories at different times. And you could use this in the organization to see live data, what's going on. Forecasting continued. Determining labor surplus or shortage. Ascertain whether there'll be a labor shortage or labor surplus for the respective job categories that you're looking at. Determine what to do about these potential problems. Goal setting and strategic planning is what we're going to be talking about next. Focus attention on the problem and provide a benchmark for determining the relative success of any programs aimed at redressing a pending labor shortage or surplus. So again, it helps you focus on the problem, whether there's a surplus and you need to do layoffs, or you'll have a lot of employees to choose from, so you can offer them lower salaries, or the opposite. Analyze labor supply and demand and include a figure for what should happen with the job category or skill area and a timetable to fill those. The next couple of slides talks about options, speed, and human suffering. Table 5.2, slide number 10. Options for reducing an expected labor surplus, right? You have a labor surplus within your organization. You can do a couple of things. You can downsize, which is the most painful, and it's very fast. Send out a notice the next day to the people that are being downsized, and tell them to meet you in HR. Return a cell phone, shut off the computer. It's very painful. I've been through 2 layoffs myself. I've been personally laid off twice. Very, very painful, very humiliating. And unfortunately, in my career, I've had to fire my fair share of employees, sometimes because of incompetence, sometimes just because you just didn't have room for them anymore, and it's very, very painful. Pay reduction, it's fast, but very high in human suffering for obvious reasons. Demotion, which is also a pay reduction, but it's not only a pay reduction, but it's also a demotion, moving from, getting quote unquote busted down in your ranks. Very high in human suffering.
Do people take pay reductions? Because one time, I think it was in economics, I learned that people, if they are offered a pay reduction, they rather leave the job.
Depends. In a book, there's a book called Leaders Eat Last. There's an example where people took furloughs, which is basically non-paid time, to make sure that there was enough money to go around for everyone to pay most people's salaries. So what ended up happening is everybody suffered a little bit, as opposed to certain people bearing the brunt of the suffering. Now that's a very altruistic way of doing things. People have to agree to it. Like you said, Tova, some people will just walk away. Really depends on the general consensus. If an organization is in danger of shutting down, I would think it's better for people to just take an unpaid week of vacation to save their jobs, and not only their jobs, but the jobs of their fellow man or woman, rather than just say, I'm going to milk this cow as long as I can.
Right.
Transfers. The speed is fast, but moderate as far as human suffering. Now, why is it moderate and not light? Because it depends where you're getting transferred to. You may be getting transferred to another shift where you're making more money, but it can be painful because the timing is not good. Imagine if you were working 2 to 11, and now you're being changed from 11 to 7, right? You're getting more money now that you're working on the night shift, but it may hurt you because it hurts your social life. Work sharing, fast and moderate, hiring freezes, slow speed to fixing the problem, low human suffering because it is a de facto. You're not throwing anybody out, you're just not hiring anybody new. Natural attrition, which means people leaving on their own through retirement, okay, or just leaving the job, and retraining, slow and low in human suffering. The next slide goes through a bunch of other things. Reducing overtime, yes, you cut the budget immediately, and it's highly revocable. You could stop it. Remember, overtime is not a birthright. Temp employees, you could stop it and it's high. It's very easy to revoke. Outsourcing, sending a job out to a different company, it's fast, speed, it's highly revocable, and you look at the rest on your own. Move on to slide 12. So downsizing, again, that's defined as the planned elimination of large numbers of personnel designed to enhance organizational effectiveness. In other words, you're cutting the fat. You're basically making the organization more nimbler. So you reduce labor costs. Technological changes reduce need for labor. Organizations change business location for economic reasons. We'll move to China. Well, not to China today, but, well, because of the outbreak, but to another country. Has negative effects on long-term organizational effectiveness, leads to loss of talent, disrupts the social networks needed to promote creativity and flexibility within the organization, because certain people are not going to move, and lets go of irreplaceable assets. People are irreplaceable. You lose a good employee, it really messes things up, and motivation levels drop off. Because when you see people leaving, coming and going, it makes everyone nervous and edgy. Goal setting and strategic planning, early retirement programs and buyouts. Baby boomers delaying retirement. It's a problem. A lot of people don't want to retire. They like the pension. So there's got to be a way of somehow buying people out, making it worthwhile. They do this a lot in the city. I have a neighbor of mine who worked for Health and Hospitals Corporation, and it was worth it for him. He got like 90% of his pay in his pension for life, or maybe 80% for retiring a little bit early, which is incredible. Think about it, he's getting almost 100% of his wages that he earned for sitting at home, just so that you open up that position so that you could either hire a newer person to replace you with better skills, or to just shut the position down so he knows you have the position, you're paying for it, but you're paying for it at a discount. Okay, employers concerned about losing the experience, implicit knowledge of older workers. So again, a lot of times they won't do a buyout. Older workers cost more, so they will do a buyout because, like I said, somebody's been working for a long time, you have to pay them a higher salary. Older workers block advancement of younger workers by just being there because their salaries take up too much of the budget. Involuntary attrition, meaning leaving on their own, through early retirement incentive programs, which is what I just mentioned before. Figure 5.2 is a graph talking about the aging of the U.S. population from the year 2000 to 2020. Here we are at 2020, and it says percentage of Americans age 55 or older is close to 40% according to this study. Move on to slide 15. The human resource planning process, goal setting and strategic planning. Temp workers and independent contractors is one way of plugging your holes. The most widespread means of eliminating a labor shortage so you get what you need. Hold on, let me just turn on the light. Just turn it off. So that's a good way of filling your labor shortage real quick. You get temp workers. Advantages: frees the firm from administrative tasks and financial burdens associated with being the employer of record. Employer of record, somebody is fired, you have to pay unemployment. There's a temp agency, there's no unemployment, there's no paying of benefits. You don't have to worry about their 401k. You don't have to worry about their disability if they go on disability or if they go on maternity. It's not your problem. It's the agency's issue. Agency could test employees, so you don't have to worry about administering exams to make sure that they're proficient in their work. The agencies take care of the training. Temp person brings an objective perspective to the organization's problems and procedures. Remember, they're not shaped yet by the culture. Now, the culture could be a good culture, but when you're shaped by the culture, you kind of think like that, and that's the only way you think. Here you have somebody coming from a culture-neutral area, and they basically are able to come in with a fresh new perspective. Slide 16, the human resource planning process continued. Goal setting, strategic planning, temporary workers and independent contractors. So what is an independent contractor? Freelancer, not part of an agency, agree to do specific tasks for specific time periods as part of a written contract between the worker and the employer. You hire an outside CPA to do your taxes for you as a freelancer, for example. Outsourcing, offshoring, and immigration. Outsourcing uses an outside organization for a broad set of services. Jobs that are proprietary, meaning like private or require tight security, should not be outsourced. Obviously, Apple's not going to outsource some of its technologies that are proprietary because then everybody will know about it. And I used Apple as an example because Apple's a very, very secretive organization. Offshoring is outsourcing where jobs leave one country and go to another, and immigration, use of various kinds of visas. All right, we move on to slide 18. Goal setting continued, altering pay and hours. Garner more hours from current employees. Sometimes you cut salaries, sometimes you reduce 401k contributions, and reduce number of hours of all workers, known as a furlough. And that's what I spoke about in that book from Simon Sinek, Leaders Eat Last. Everybody elected to go on a furlough so that nobody needed to be laid off. Program implementation and evaluation. Make sure that some individual is held accountable for achieving the stated goals and has the necessary authority and resources to accomplish them, meaning the recruitment and cutting jobs and whatever those goals are. You need to have regular progress reports and evaluate the results. Keeps people on their toes. Now, the special case of affirmative action planning. Plan for subgroups within the labor force. Affirmative action plan basically compels you to hire minorities and women. And then you have a workforce utilization review, which is controversial because if according to your review, you see you don't have enough people of a certain ethnicity or race, then you'll have to hire more of them and maybe fire some of the others or not hire some of the other types of people. This could seem to be what we call reverse discrimination, and that's a hot topic which we're not going to talk about tonight. Slide 21 is an overview of the individual job choice organizational recruitment process. Okay, you could look at that on your own. It's quite straightforward. Slide 22, personnel policies. A personnel policies is a generic term used to refer to organizational decisions that affect the nature of the vacancies for which people are recruited. We have something called due process policies by which company formally lays out the steps an employee can take to appeal a termination decision. So if somebody's terminated, let's say like in a union situation or even a non-union situation, they're given the ability and shown how they can appeal that decision. Employment at will policies stating that either an employee or an employer or an employee can terminate the employment relationship at any time, regardless of cause. In New York City, in New York State in general, we are employment at will, which means you can walk off the job and they could tell you to walk off the job without any reason. Unless, of course, it's a bargaining unit situation or it's a union situation where you have seniority and other union aspects. Move on to slide 23. Extrinsic and intrinsic rewards lead the market approach to paying higher than current market wages. Well, if you're going to be the leader in that, you know you're going to be able to attract other people quicker than your competition because you will become known as a well-paying organization. Image advertising, when an organization promotes itself to help draw applicants, such as an organization that's very socially responsible, Starbucks does that. Influence the degree to which the person feels attracted to the organization. Recruitment sources, internal versus external. Internal applicants are well known because of the employees that work for you. Cheaper because they're there faster, because they're there, they can just fill the vacancy. And inside hires often outperform others because there's less of a learning curve, they know the ins and outs. And it garners loyalty. People will know that you're being given the first right of refusal and they're going to push themselves to work harder to reach higher positions. External may not be any internal recruits, so sometimes they'll just recruit from the outside and not make it available inside. Exposure to new ideas or ways of doing business as opposed to hiring somebody from within who again will be shaped and molded by the current corporate culture. Good way to strengthen one's own company and weaken one's competitors at the same time because you're taking away talent from the outside world, preventing your competition from getting it. recruitment sources. Sometimes it's self-selection. You select it yourself. Sometimes it's a lift out. Now, I downloaded an article about lift out. Very, very interesting. Let me get into it. 1 second. I'll try to post this as a link so you can read it on your own. Okay, so companies looking to expand quickly into new geographic areas sometimes use something called a lift out. Okay, and it's becoming more and more popular. And here's where it started out. So lift out is hiring a functioning group of people from the same company who have worked well together. So you're basically transplanting a group of people from one company who have worked together and you're bringing them to your company. So you don't have to worry about them getting along, getting to know each other, getting to know each other's habits. They've worked well. So you're basically stealing away. And it's not sometimes you stealing them, it's sometimes people willingly leaving together as a group. I have a friend that works in the finance world. He's in IT, and he told me about this kind of practice where entire divisions, like 6 or 7 guys on a team, will leave together to form a new company. Okay? We move on. Slide 26. Sometimes we have something called e-recruiting, using social networking, like Monster, ZipRecruiter, and use the organization's webpage to solicit applications. You go to any decent website, any decent government hospital website, for example, you're always going to have a career tab where you could click on to see what job vacancies exist. Slide 27. Sometimes you have public and private employment agencies, state employment office, which is where the unemployment office is, and they have job listings, and that services the blue-collar market. Private agencies charge the employer for referrals, don't have to be unemployed to use them, headhunters, and the like. Slide 28, sometimes you go to colleges and universities. Colleges and universities will have placement programs, internships, or they'll go down and do recruiting on the high school level. Evaluating the quality of a source, your yield ratios to see how many good jobs you've got, good employees you've gotten to fill your jobs, and of course, you look at your cost per hire data. Recruiters come in different shapes and sizes. They could be recruiting for a functional area, for a department. They could be looking for certain traits of people. There's realism involved, meaning that there is a human being. It's not just an algorithm finding you resumes. And enhancing recruiter impact provides timely feedback, and they can recruit in teams. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the rest of the slides from 30 and 30, actually just slide 31 is an appendix, which is something you can look at on your own. Thank you so much for joining. Again, I apologize for the sound of my voice. I'm recovering from the flu, and this is what's left over. Thank you very much, and have a good night.